What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Keep Klimbing podcast. Back today with my man Brian, and we are going to keep working through this blog. We put out this blog for Premier Pitching, how to throw a baseball, the science of efficiency and performance. And the last couple of weeks, we've been going through each of the main subject points in here. Run through them real quick. You should go back and look at each one of these. Optimizing your kinematic sequence, that was its own episode. Mobility considerations for optimal performance, that was its own episode. The role of ball flight analytics, that was its own episode. And now today we're going to get into the fourth topic, force production and efficiency metrics. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit with you guys and Brian here on the record about the Torpedo Bats that are taking the world by storm. If you guys missed it, quick little recap for everyone who maybe might watch this that didn't see it. Torpedo Bats, the Yankees rolled out this past weekend, opening weekend for Major League Baseball, and they rolled out these new bats. Maybe we can get a picture of them from
we'll get a picture. Yeah,
and
we got
put
a
it up
picture
here, right? And basically the concept is the barrel where people are making most contact, which all of the data and the bat tracking data these days is suggesting that more of your contact is happening like closer to the label or the handle. So they took some of the meatier part of the end cap of the bat and moved it down towards the barrel. So if you can think about what a torpedo kind of looks like, you've got like the skinnier handle. It gets, past the label.
Fatter in the middle.
It gets fat in the middle, but then it's also tapered back a little bit by the cup and the cap. Okay. So it's funny.
Wasn't this a bunch of MIT nerds?
Yes. So yeah, baseball scientists basically said, hey, look, we hit the ball here more. Why don't we make a bat that fits that? And truth be told, you think about, I've been hearing, obviously we deal with a lot of the pitching data and stuff like that, but I don't deal hands-on face-to-face with a lot of, the high-level hitting data.
Mm-hmm.
We see it, we observe it, we understand it, but obviously we don't have the tools to like measure that at our location. But in Major League Baseball and the motion capture system that we have, there's a hitting version of it. And all of these clubs that have it at their stadiums, they have in-game units that are tracking the hitter, it's tracking the pitcher, it's tracking the fielders and like position, for defensive positioning purposes. Well, one of the bat tracking features on this is that we can measure and quantify right where you hit the ball on the bat most often. So that would be your sweet spot.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, makes sense.
So
that isn't general.
So people don't know this yet. Like, and this is maybe under the hood on MLB scouting reports, right? I was talking to a buddy of mine that's pitching for the Yankees, actually. I think he's in AAA with them, but he was telling me that, these scouting reports that they're getting now, because of bat tracking data, they're getting, as the pitcher, I'm getting a report that says or suggests where you hit the ball at on your bat off of me. So if I can see that you hit more of the balls on the end of your bat, I'm going to throw you more pitches that break away from you because you're more susceptible to that. Wow. And then vice versa, if I jam you more and I'm more of a two-seam guy, I'm going to throw that pitch against you. And I mean, it's helping with like pitch calling strategies, but also like managers. Think about, I've got a righty facing a righty and he hits balls in off the hands. Well, the righty I've got in the game throws four-seamers. He doesn't throw two-seamers, so I can't get it in on his hands as good. So I'm going to go to the righty in the bullpen that's got a two-seamer, that can run that ball in on this guy in that situation, right? So all kinds of game management strategies that go into play. Now, as far as like the bat tracking goes, the torpedo bats, the general concept or premise is that we're putting more of the, hardy part of the bat in the sweet spot of where the hitter hits. I don't know exactly if the torpedo bat for you is a little bit different for me. I haven't got into the weeds enough of it to see or know that part yet. If it's not, I would almost anticipate that it's coming because of that technology that we have. And I can see that, it used to be just based off of like feel and like balance and weight distribution and probably like your ability to like swing and repeat a swing. But now if we could couple that with actually putting the heaviest, meatiest part of the bat where the data suggests I hit the ball the most frequent, then that's my sweet spot. And I wonder if, bat companies like Marucci or Victus or whatever are going to start making bats that are cut custom to where your sweet spot is. That's totally an abstract thought. I have no idea if that's already going on.
It is, man.
Someone smarter than me certainly has already thought about that. No doubt about it. But I don't know if it's actually the way that works now. What I want to spend more time talking about, though, is we had a very long conversation about this yesterday at the facility, is how to pitch to torpedo bats. Because how to pitch to torpedo bats. Now, the situation or circumstance that we were discussing is, I don't think it's anything you can combat as a pitcher, truthfully. Okay? Kind of like the ambidextrous pitcher facing the switch hitter. The pitcher has to pick what side of the plate or what arm they're pitching with first, and then the hitter gets to pick. So the hitter, technically gets the advantage in that. Because if I pick left, then you're going to pick right. And then after I pick left, I can't switch. Like I'm stuck and now we're left versus right and my advantage kind of goes away. So now same thing with the torpedo bats, okay? That if you're using a torpedo bat, I don't know that there's anything that a pitcher can really do or a manager can really do to combat it, right? Like I think that you can try to, in the micro sense, like, pitch to more of the hitter's weaknesses, and pitchers have always been trying to do that, but give you a hypothetical example. If a player is going to bring a torpedo bat up against me and I'm a four-seam cutter curveball guy, I'll give you that example. Like I wouldn't have been the guy to run one in on a righty very good later in my career, at least, and, so he's going to bring a torpedo bat that helps him not get jammed as much. Right. And he hits balls out away from him. Then when I run my pitches away from him,
that's in his sweet spot.
It's in his sweet spot. Yeah.
But you don't know. And that's
and if you were the hitter, if you were a hitter and you were facing me, I guess this is where it comes down to. If you were a hitter and you were facing me, would you even bring the torpedo bat up to the plate, or would you bring, knowing I had a good cutter, would you bring the bat that's got more meat towards the end of it? And I'm sure conversations and decisions like this are like all going on that I'm not around and understand, that brings a lot more complexity to it. But if you just were to, let's just boil it down and stay simple with it, right? You got a guy that walks up with a torpedo bat against you, what would you do? Like as the pitcher,
My goodness. There's so many thoughts and I think a lot of this, we talk about the data every year. If I have a torpedo bat, I walk up, so are you going to have different torpedo bats based on what a pitcher is now?
Yeah. I could go a lot of different directions based off of the pitcher, based off of the hitter, based off of your lifetime, experiences against this. Because, if you knew I was a guy that threw you a bunch of cutters, kind of back to that, situation, would you bring a torpedo up or would you bring a regular cut bat that's got more meat at the cap because you don't want to hit it off the end,
To me, I think, you start seeing this and I think it, we've talked about these things, and within this, you talk about force production, efficiency metrics, mastering a four-seam fastball, where does it move? Mm-hmm. I've said this to you, and I think this is interesting. If this is where this is going, and you have these torpedo bats, and this guy's doing this, I think as a pitcher, if I'm going to be able to beat guys in this respect, now I'm going to have to really define the differences in how I'm gripping. We talk about seam orientation, whatnot, to get movement, whatnot. Can I sit with just one set of things, or one set of principles as a pitcher,
Yeah.
am I going to have to really reorientate my hand to where I can move balls in and out, up and down, and do so many different things with it?
Yeah. That's exactly where my head went. Okay. So like if historically you always first and foremost try to pitch to your strengths, right? Especially out of the bullpen. I'm out there simply because I have good matchups against these guys, and the manager already wants you to throw your best pitches against them. Right. Now, within that, you're trying to pick between your strengths what fits the best against the hitter's weaknesses, right? Like if this guy, if the scouting report says this guy struggles hitting changeups and I don't throw changeups, I'm not going to go out there and try throwing changeups. Right. Like, so you got to kind of, take. That's
a tough gig.
Yeah. Like, if you face that guy.
I'll change up, haven't thrown one in 10 years.
Yeah. If you face that guy in the 7th inning, you're not running changeups at him, like you're taking your repertoire, knowing like what he struggles with and putting your strengths against his weaknesses as best as possible. So, and that happens often, like a young player will hear or read a scouting report and think like, oh, well, shoot, I got to throw that guy changeups because he doesn't hit changeups very good. It's like, well, if you don't have a good changeup, then he's going to smack your changeup, so you got to find something that, because most likely if he struggles hitting changeups, I could still probably throw my breaking ball to a certain part of the zone to like slow him down enough to swing and miss on that, right? And
it's still off speed.
Yeah, you got to learn where those things are at. And truth be told, like that guy might be sandwiched in between two guys that don't hit righty breaking balls very good. So you still got to be able to figure out a way to get that guy out, right? If that was a lefty for me, I'm throwing him cutters up and in all day, and I already like been through the lumps to figure that one out, so you'd face your guys that you throw your breaking balls to and get out, and then that guy I'd probably lean more on my cutter. But as it pertains specifically to torpedo bats, I think a guy now that comes up with a torpedo bat, do you change your game plan? If so, how? And basically the equipment has changed, so like it's a whole nother variable of like what to think and consider about as a pitcher. That I think first and foremost, it always reigns true. Like you're in there to throw your strengths and throw your best stuff.
Right.
But secondarily, if I get into account, I'll give you an example. If I get into account a righty with a torpedo bat in a 2-1 count, I would say I'm like, if I was already pretty likely to throw a cutter in that count, I'm probably like doubling down on that. Something to run it away from him to get it. Because in general, the theory is that the torpedo bat is a little harder to jam them because more of the weight's down towards the table, right? So the end of the bat becomes more susceptible.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So the end of the bat shots, you've got a little bit more room, grace towards the end of the bat, that if I can get to a 2-1 count and get him to hit something off the end, like I've got a higher percentage chance of success. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I think if I see a righty, I think what it does, the biggest thing that it does is that in my hitter advantage counts, I'm probably percentage-wise just more likely to throw something that I have that runs away, from the bat, runs away from the hitter, which was probably always the case. You know what I'm saying? But your fastball that like leaks over the plate is clearly, from the statistics, 13 home runs in 2 games for the Yankees, is more likely to have bigger damage on. Now, consider this. I don't believe that a jam shot, broken bat, whatever, turns into a double laced into the left
it's
field.
Still a wood bat.
Right? Yeah, like it's not that much of a difference. We're talking about the ball that gets hit to left field and the left fielder is able to kind of coast over and catch it like this. Like that ball's either hitting off the wall or going out because just that little bit extra of contact
millimeters,
quality.
right?
Absolute millimeter difference, right? But what I'll say though that does entirely change is the thought about for a pitcher to be more well diversified. That's the point that you were going to.
Yeah.
I think. That like if
you
I
can't
have
help it.
Yeah, so flip the hitter around. You go to that lefty. Now a lefty comes up against me with a torpedo bat. My saving grace against lefties, once I figured out how to throw a cutter and where and when and how to throw it, the first year I started with it, in low A, which I threw a cutter my whole life, but I didn't really understand what hitters it played against best, right-handed versus left-handed, power versus contacts, counts to throw it in, whatever. Right. When I did that, my batting average against lefties went down like 100 points over the course of a whole year. It was fantastic, right? And I really learned how to like use it and throw.
That's huge.
Yeah, awesome, right? Went from like 300-ish to like 200-ish, and yeah, it was a big weapon for me. So then as I got later in my career, I was just like, holy cow, I mean, like, I'm just probably going to throw cutters. Any big power hitting lefty, like if I ever, and I could throw it for a strike too, because it didn't move a whole ton, like whatever. That it was my safety pitch. It was, I got 2-0 and I was like, okay, well, I could probably just throw this guy 3 cutters and I feel pretty good about my chances still, even though I'm down 2-0, as long as I could throw for a strike. Because it has late movement, it runs in towards the hands, and, especially in a 2-0 count, a big hitter wants to drive the baseball, he wants to get his hands extended. A cutter coming into a lefty looks like it's out over the plate, and then the last minute just zips right in.
Right.
Gets off the barrel.
And it doesn't need that much movement.
Right. Now put a torpedo bat in his hands. Did my weapon, did my percentage chance just go down? And I would say it absolutely did.
Do we have enough data to know that yet?
I don't think so. I don't think we will for a while, until either more people are using torpedo bats, big enough sample size, and then also not like sample size just to the hitter, but sample size against all different types of pitches, right?
Right.
But in theory, if the weight of the bat is more towards the label, and I was getting outs with guys towards the label, then now my ability to do both, because that guy just got a little bit of advantage towards my strength, that I'm going to have to be able to run something away from him to keep him honest. Because already you couldn't just sit there and throw cutters, everybody, because then they'd all just start opening it up and trying to drive the ball this way. You have to keep a balanced approach where they can't eliminate sides of the plate against you.
Yeah.
And if you eliminate a side of the plate, it makes it a whole lot easier for the hitter, right? So I think what it does, that's where my head went. Your point of what you brought up first. I think what it does is, from a big picture standpoint, makes a diversified, pitch arsenal much more valuable, which years ago it was. And now we've gotten into this very like niche-y, just throw your best pitches,
specialized,
just throw as hard as you can, very specialized.
Yes.
So you add one little wrinkle into this where it helps people get more of an advantage just from a straight up equipment base, that gives them a little bit more of an advantage, where I think it actually starts to swing us back into this pendulum of a diversified arsenal approach, so that you can't just come up and think a torpedo bat's going to solve your problems against me with a cutter because, hey, I got this 2-seamer now.
And the specialized deal started when the bullpens, I mean, there was, okay, I got the lefty righty matchup. I'm going to get this guy because he throws this well. I'm going to get this guy because he throws this well. And you would have 4 pitchers in an inning.
Yep.
And then the MLB made the rule, you have to face at least 3 batters.
Yep.
So that started that process. I think personally, you did see that. You started seeing relievers with 3 pitches like what you're talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, you had the pitch you relied on, but you couldn't just, you look at even the closers. I mean, one of the things that makes Ryan Helsley so good is that off-speed pitch.
Yep.
Because you got to gear up for 100, and then he throws it at 88, and you're just like, I have no jock left.
Yep. Nasty. Yeah.
It's ugly. Yeah. And people go, oh, why'd he swing at that? Dude, just get in the box, okay? You wouldn't want to get in the box.
You're trying to get the bat going so quick to hit 100 that, by the time you recognize it's a changeup, it's gone already. Yeah.
So now you have this next. So now the hitters are countering again.
It's very interesting, though, to me that it's equipment based, because everything up till now has been very data oriented.
There's nothing left. Honestly, think about it. I mean, we have this kind of intricate data at 8U.
Yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. So at the major league level, honestly, what else is there left?
Yeah.
You've got as much data as you can get. I have a bat in my hand.
Mm-hmm.
What can the bat? Now it's a matter of, I know that this is it, but I can't, I got to change the bat. You have to change the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with the pitcher is the only thing you can do is change the way you throw the baseball now. You have to counter with a similar type of thought process. It's not necessarily equipment,
Yep.
but I have to be able to counter
Yep.
this move. It's like chess.
It's so fascinating to me that like relationship between pitcher and hitter, because it happens every year, but then it also happens like, historically over the course of time. And what I mean by that is every year the hitters are always playing kind of catch up, no matter if it's like the pitchers are kind of getting their arms loose, or arms built up, but like, they're coming out the gates throwing 95, right? It's the hitters that got to get their timing down. And it's that like timing sequence and like build up of pitches for the starting pitchers is why spring training exists the way that it does, and then they get their timing down and they go. Well, I mean, everything historically, like from high school to college, right? If you throw 92 in high school, like you just throw 92 and that plays similarly to what it does. It's easier to predict and project too, for all those reasons that, a hitter to go to college and adjust to everybody throwing 92 is way different. The hitters are always adjusting like to the pitchers. And I think it's very unique now that the hitters have made this adjustment and it's taken off in the news headlines, at least as much as it has, that I'm going to be really interested or intrigued to see what type of adjustments pitchers make on it moving forward. That it started through my head, the last couple of days, and all of us at the shop, talking about, well, what would you do for it? You know what I mean?
Right.
How would you combat it? Like, what can you even do? Because I think at the end of the day, like, it's probably a little bit up to the manager. I don't know that, if these next three guys are the guy that we're worried about doing damage this next inning.
But don't you, I look from the outside in, I listen to as much as I can, but, everybody has a philosophy of the way they play. Whether how much analytics go into this and this and this to dictate, and then it becomes, well, I trust this guy, I trust this guy, I trust this guy, here in these spots, this, that. So to me, I think it does. You're going to have to look at the philosophy of how you approach.
Well, there's two different routes,
right?
I think that's what you're working through there, is that there's two different routes. I think there's like the micro or like acute decision-making process that's like, how do we get this guy out in this game? But then what you're saying or suggesting is much more zoomed out, chronic, big picture view of like, how do we build our pitchers, recruit our players, sign our free agents, develop our minor leaguers, develop our pitchers. How do we build our pitching staffs to be better equipped against things like that?
Because I think that's got to take a long approach.
Yes, a big picture approach. And I do think that like the diversification of, pitch arsenals, like basically being able to do, the fastball that goes this way, a fastball that goes this way, a breaking pitch that goes this way, and an off-speed pitch that goes this way, like becomes like, it's always been valuable, right?
Yeah,
like if you
but
can
it's
do all four
hard.
of those things for a long time, like you're a major league starter. Like that's really hard to do at an elite level, to do all those things. Because we've talked already about like having supination biases or pronation biases, right? Like I have a supination bias as a pitcher, which you need pronation to throw a changeup. So I spent forever trying to figure out how to hold and throw and do a changeup. And, I just couldn't figure out, and I couldn't figure out why. And then like I came to know as I was later that like I'm really just not like built or cut to throw a pronation changeup. Now I had some success either throwing like a split finger pitch or like a supinated seam shifted one, but I spent so much time in my career just trying to do that and roll it off. And like, my version of rolling that off of, a pronation being a supinator, like it winds up just kind of like coming flat and looking like a fastball, and it's 88 now and, not moving, So you're kind of beating your head against the wall trying to throw a pitch type like doesn't suit your body type, and we've talked about that before, about like identifying, key metrics of who you are to help, say or suggest what a successful pitch arsenal like would be for you, know? And yeah, I mean, so that's always been valuable to be able to diversify your pitch arsenal, but I think now with an equipment advantage, it probably takes it a step back of like, we've gotten to these like really nichey, hard throwing, tight slider or outlier off speed pitch that does this bring it back in the step of like more towards a 1990s pitcher that has a very diversified approach that can throw you something that goes all of these different directions because of this equipment. And I don't know, time will tell, but that's kind of where my brain went.
I think you, in a situation like this, because I like proactive measures, and that's a very macro view. So you have proaction. But what's problematic for Major League Baseball pitchers is you're reactive now. Everything is a reactive measure. So it has to go to a micro. What is this guy doing here and whatnot? And you're trying to, you're just reacting.
Well, that's the only way you solve it in the short term. You have to react to
it's a reactionary position. And that puts you on the defensive usually as a pitcher, which is not a good place to be.
No. Well, yeah, and that's how advantages are created. Absolutely. And what it'll do is like guys will go home for the off season, and more guys who throw cutters will spend more time throwing two-seamers this off season, and like see the value in doing that because maybe last off season they went into it being like, kind of what I said, holy cow, look at how much success I had against lefties with my cutters. I got to keep getting better with my cutter. Like, so those all things just like help navigate our game over the course of time that, I wanted to take some time to talk about because it's a very interesting thing that happened over the weekend that absolutely will impact our game moving forward. And I'm really curious to see how it does.
Yeah. Especially with 13 home runs.
Yeah, in 2 games. Crazy. Fun fact, it's not just the Yankees that are using torpedo bats either. There's other people. And I don't know the full story, but I think there was a certain bat manufacturer that like did it first. So like all of their sponsored players have torpedo bats, but it's just more recognizable that, of course, because it's the Yankees, but that like, all of these Yankee guys and all the home runs that they hit, obviously. And it was new probably for some of the players that it caught the headlines and everybody's talking about it. So anyways, back to our regularly scheduled program.
I like that.
We're going to spend some time talking about force production and efficiency metrics, how they affect players, their progressions, and their overall success on the field, right? So truthfully, the way that this, comes about in my thoughts in my brain and the overall progression for an athlete is that, force production is one of the very first foundational, very important things, KPIs, key performance indicators that we have to check the box of that attributes to a player's ongoing success, or at least like helps them improve their ceiling, right? That like higher metrics on force plates don't necessarily make you a good pitcher, but it improves the likelihood that you can become a good pitcher, if that makes sense at all. And so more of what I mean is that, the force production, we've done some studies and some research to show and suggest that if a pitcher is below 175 pounds, they have a very, very minimal likelihood that they're going to be a high-performing thrower. Now, what we deem as a high-performing thrower is someone who throws, with good stuff, with good strikes, with good health, right? Good stuff meaning 90 plus, strikes percentage-wise, and health like long-term longevity throwing, that you can throw really hard in
Tim Lincecum.
Yeah, and not be sustainable, right? So like quality force production that we would see on force plates in the weight room, definitely have a really high correlation to your ability to produce force athletically and on the mound and really anything that you're doing. But one of the biggest initial like key features, key performance indicators, like I said, for any pitcher is kind of like checking those preliminary boxes. How much force can you put into the ground? How much shoulder torque can you create? What type of stride length can you create? And there's mobility considerations that go into that. There's, force producing strategies that go into that. Some people, we talked about it before, like the kangaroo and the gorilla concept, like some people are much like bulkier, heavier, squattier athletes. And then you've got your other people that are much, springier, thinner framed, sometimes taller, like that the way that you produce force can vary from person to person, and your best route for generating your most amount of force may not be like it is mine. So you can't just be like, well, just get into the ground more and produce more force there, because that may not be work very well for you if you're a kangaroo. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it
If
makes
you're
sense.
a springier athlete, you actually need to focus more on like impulse, explosive, timing of the impulse, and all those things to produce the peak amount of force that your body's like, and your strategies on that.
I want to ask, I may be getting ahead of the game. Sorry. But you're talking about stride, because I see some kids stride and it's a longer stride, and you're saying that there, but the front leg collapses.
Okay.
And you hear all the time about, well, you have to have the stiff front leg to come over and whatnot. Is there a
right way?
Yeah.
Yes, there is. It's not stiff versus bent.
Okay.
It's not. It's just that once your front foot hits, it can't bend further.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah,
because then you're giving way.
Yeah, we call it a squishy front knee. That's what
that makes sense.
If it hits and then bends more, think about it.
You're
like
decelerating.
Chains. Yeah, think about like links in the chain. Like if we're losing force at that knee, from the ground, and we're losing it because we're squishing that front knee, then less of that energy transfer can happen up through the ball. Now,
sense.
Yeah, I mean, and that kind of goes into like some of the strategies you would not and should not. And this has happened. This has happened. It's extremely unfortunate that there are people that are better suited to throw with a bent front knee, and because of how popular lead leg blocking has gotten, that all of the internet coaches want to say, well, you got to have a straight front leg if you want to throw hard. It's like, no, you don't. Like
because there's guys in the major leagues.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and Nolan Ryan didn't throw with a freaking leg like that.
Neither did Sandy Koufax.
Yeah, and some of the best pitchers in the history of our game, Pedro Martinez. That dude was 5'9" and threw 100, like before people threw 100. So yeah, and that can be what's very like detrimental with. We said it before about like reading blog topics like this and just being like, well, I'm gonna just try to do this with all my guys then. Like that's not a foolproof way to do it. There's bigger contexts and concepts that go into it that, yeah, holy cow, like there are correlations with lead leg blocking, and it is one of the highest correlated things. Lead knee extension velocity is technically what it's called on our motion capture system.
Yeah.
And that is one of the highest correlating things outside of like, shoulder rotation and hand speed,
Sure.
Highest correlating things to ball velocity. But the way that you go about doing that is so different from person to person that, you don't need to have a perfectly straight all the way up in your hip, front leg to throw hard. What you need is a firm front side that's stable into the ground, that doesn't bend anymore, to rotate your whole pelvis, which then rotates your whole torso, which then rotates your shoulders and your elbow and your hand, right?
Makes sense.
And so my simple short answer to that is yes, there's a right way to go about it, that it's firm. But what it looks like, it doesn't have to be straight. It can be bent. The more bent it gets, I'll say from experience, the harder it is to keep it firm.
Yeah, I can
right?
Absolutely
think about like if you just had
the further you get apart,
you had a PVC pipe, right? And you took it and you jammed it into the ground as hard as you could. Okay, and it can sting your hands a little bit, But think about how much. Okay, does it break? It's a big thick one, probably not. Okay, think about if you took a bent PVC pipe and then you jam that in the ground as hard as you could, which one's more likely to break?
The bent one.
Yeah, the bent one, right? Because it's got a kind of a kink in the chain right there.
Absolutely.
Where like it's energy leaks is why things break like that. Energy leaks, right? So that general concept, yes, it's easier to generate more force up the chain with a lead,
makes sense.
With a straight like lever.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But taking a guy that feels comfortable and doesn't squish his front knee and making him do that is like the total opposite of what you should be trying to do. Right.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, stride dynamics, stride length, that's obviously very important for how all that, but I'll tell you, like, if you got a guy that's like that, how do you go about fixing it? And I think that's where most people like get off on this.
Makes sense.
Right? Your way to go about helping people fix their front leg if they've got a bad front leg, and this is a little nugget for you, you don't actually focus on the front leg. It's all about how they get to there. You know, and you're if you're gonna sit there and do like, you know, knee strengthening drills, you know, like knee you know, extension drills, and then when you go and throw, this guy's gonna be all just thinking about, oh, I gotta do that when I throw. Like that's not the way that you go about it. Typically, the reason energy leaks happen is because the stage before, or the couple of stages before, in the energy creation, and, you know, the energy like capture and what am I saying? Brain farting. Like the way it goes down the chain. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The capture and then the rotation.
The energy is just, yes.
Yeah, the capture and the transfer of the energy. Sorry, brain fart for a second. Capture and transfer of the energy in those stages leading up to that is probably where the breakdown happened. And what you see with it, you know, in a bent, squishy front knee is the byproduct of what's actually breaking down in delivery. And a lot of people make that mistake where they say, oh, well, he's got a squishy front leg, so I'm just going to get him doing some drills where we do all this stuff. And,
right,
you know, we really focus on that front leg. It's like, no, his pelvis is probably just getting into a crappy position as it gets into foot strike, and he has nothing else to do but to like squish, you know? So
makes sense. Cause it's interesting because I watched my son as he grew up, got stronger and whatnot. He never had a straight front leg.
Yeah.
Never. And, but
I didn't either.
He, you know, and his stride was pretty good, but he increased in velocity as he got older, stronger. Even in college, every year his velocity was. So I thought, you know, but I was always told, everybody you see, you know, straight front leg. And I'm watching him and but what do I say to him?
Yeah.
He's not digressing.
Sure.
So what do you say? So I just left it alone. I just like, you know, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Lead leg specifically. I think you're always trying to build necessary mobility capabilities. And we talked about that previously, that's a little bit different from person to person based off of how they're put together, how they generate their force and all those things. But then improves stability or strength, hamstring strength.
That makes sense.
Do they have the capacity to actually put their foot in the ground and decelerate themselves quickly? That might be a mechanism simply because their hamstring's not strong enough to slow their body down.
Yeah. And I think this is the things, the arguments that I make a lot of times. And I think, you know, I just look at things at this and I go, man, well, that just doesn't look right, because you got this kid. Where's his body type? This young man is not like that guy. And you want him to throw like this kid who's 6'4" and 220, but this kid is 5'10",
totally
150.
And squattier.
Why are we doing that? And then you want to create the same. Well, what's comfortable? Yeah. I always believe that it's the same thing on the hitting side. You know, I don't care how you start. If you watched Craig Counsell for any length of time play baseball, it isn't how you start. It's, are you getting into the place where everything is working right, the balance, the rhythm, the timing, all that. It's the same thing, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
With pitching.
Yep.
I don't care. Everybody's windup is somewhat different. And guys are starting in you know, the stretch now and different things because they feel more comfortable getting where they need to be, right?
No doubt. We've gotten better at identifying where they need to be, because I think 20 years ago, we still didn't really know, you know? So now we're drawing,
right?
Technology is getting better, and, you know, we're able to identify things that, you know, do produce success for pitchers from a performance, like data's, you know, set standpoint. Because obviously, like, stuff, strikes, and health produce success for them. Well, how do we produce better stuff, strikes, and health? And those are kind of some of the KPIs that we've gotten into a little bit more. But yeah, you know, I think all of those things, our business is entirely built around that. Is that almost all of those things that you're saying or discussing are like what we would consider KPIs that maybe fall a bit on a spectrum, where you've got people who move a certain way, you've got people who, you know, throw a certain way, you've got people who generate force a certain way. And the easiest thing to do, I think, as a younger in age or experience level, pitching coach is to see something that is generally good, like mobility. The last episode we just had is a perfect example, like mobility, and think that just more mobility for a pitcher is better. And that's just wrong. More lead knee extension velocity for the wrong pitcher is wrong. More mobility for the wrong pitcher is wrong. So you have to really know or understand, how this player moves, what those spectrums even are. Like if that, and that's usually where a lot of our like coaching conversations start, is like understanding, archetypes, different types of people and players. And if you don't understand the archetypes, then you'll never understand where they fall on the archetypes. Right. And then from those archetypes, where they fall, what are the strategies that help those types of players within that archetype get better at said KPIs? And that's what our business is built around, that right there. Identifying players, identifying where they're at on the spectrum, identifying, strategies that have worked to improve those said KPIs. And then, then there's some, basic things of like, well, how old is the player? What type of progression are they on? Like a beginner, intermediate, advanced type of progression. What calendar month of the year is it? What should the training goals be? And this, obviously very different in November than it is in April 1st, like today, right? And then putting strategies in place to help keep taking steps forward on those things. And yeah, I mean, you want to start talking about all that stuff and how much we implement all that stuff in our training programs, as opposed to somewhere else you could go to do that. Like there's a lot of thought that goes into it,
Just a visual thought process, watching over the weekend. And I always kind of, as you're talking about these things and movement, I always search my brain to look at things. You watched, over the weekend, first night I'm watching Blake Snell for the Dodgers.
Yep.
Throw. Then I watched Sonny Gray.
Yep.
For the Cardinals. Later in the week, the other day, his first start, I think it was last night, right? Against the Angels. Michaelis. Michaelis is one of the stiffest guys I've ever seen.
Yep.
And when the ball comes out of his hand, you're like, did he really throw that way? And then it doesn't look that fast. It's weird.
Yeah.
But he's very effective and whatnot. And that's the thing that comes to my mind when you start talking about these archetypes.
Yep.
That guy's a completely different dude physically than a Sonny Gray.
And all of his training programs should be totally different too.
Right?
And all of his mobility exercises should be totally different too.
He's not as mobile as a Sonny Gray.
Well, hey, yeah. And I think the general thought on like your coach who doesn't understand the archetypes or doesn't have the experience to, implement that with, would see a tight guy like that and say, hey, yeah, you got to get more mobile, man. But more mobility on a guy like that could actually get him hurt.
Right.
Take his performance down or get him hurt.
You looked at Yoshinobu, right? He's one of those springy guys, I think, in my opinion, because he kind of the way his motion is, and it just kind of flings it.
Yep.
So all of those things are popping through my head and getting a visual of those things that you're talking about.
Yep.
And sometimes I don't know that we try hard enough to do that. Even as a player, if you look at how do I move, has anybody even asked me about that?
It's a very labor intensive process.
Yeah.
When a player comes in and starts and does an assessment with our coaching staff, just the intake assessment alone takes an hour and a half to 2 hours. So yeah, I mean, you want to mix this in with like, conversations we've had previously about like business models.
Right.
It's tough to do and keep up with more players, and how do you bring in more players and keep a really impactful, personal, relational, detailed approach like that? It's really hard.
That's
really hard, you know,
Yeah.
because typically speaking, the higher the volume gets, the quality of service goes
The
down.
less contact you
That's
have.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it's
I
tough.
I saw Brett out at the
How game.
Hal game. Yeah, and I couldn't help it. Because I'm watching opening day with the Tigers and the Dodgers. And the Tigers are a very good baseball team.
Yeah.
And the Dodgers just kind of destroyed them.
Yeah.
It was kind of I was a little shocked. But Scooble was fun to watch.
Yeah.
That guy is
Stud.
just loads of fun to watch.
Yeah.
But as I told you, I'm watching this, and they had him in an interview, and he was talking about throwing his changeup because his changeup is just nasty.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about these things, how do you get something to move? And that was the thing. And he comes on and he's holding it like this, basically. He's got he calls it a circle change, but it didn't really look like, because his fingers are down here like this. He's got the two on top and he's holding the ball. He says, I kind of do this. And he said, a natural way you throw it, he says, is pronation. He says, I don't pronate with my changeup.
Yep.
He said, I can't tell you. It's just a feel. And he said, and he was talking about the data and whatnot. He says, I really don't understand it all, but it just works this way.
Yeah.
And that was fascinating to me when he said that.
I think, so I mean, that process right there, I think, is how pitch design has evolved so much that, 10 years ago, before we had, TrackMan on every pitch in the off season, you throw it just helps get the snowball rolling down the hill quicker. It helps
because the data is showing him it's working.
Good. It's good. Yeah. So just do that again. Okay, it worked. Do that again. Oh, that one didn't work. Something with that was wrong. You try to work through and associate feels. And right on this blog right here, you can see this slow-mo grip release video. So that's paired up. So that's our Edgertronic high-speed camera view, and maybe we can throw it up here so they can see while we're talking about it. But that's our and coupled right next to it on our app and our platform is all the TrackMan data. So you can see the metrics that would constitute if that pitch is good or not, but you can also see grip, release, and seam orientation as the ball flies out of your hand.
So he's
at some
So he's at some point seeing that, right?
100%. Yeah.
When he's
100%.
throwing that and seeing where his hand is.
See what the differences are. Okay, that was a little bit different. I'm going to try to go back and repeat that other feel. Do it again. And you just keep attaching feels with, data to confirm, its effectiveness. And you do that, 100 times and 1,000 times, and then there you go. You got to pitch that moves. And yeah, I mean, you don't really need to be able to explain scientifically what the heck it does. You just got to be able to stay off the barrel, and that's all they care about. That's all they should care about.
Yes.
All of the scientific stuff about how to.
But this is what he was using.
Yeah, 100%. All the scientific stuff about how it works is way more important for the coaches to know, so that they can go repeat that success with other players. The player in the instance doesn't, as long as he's producing it, it doesn't matter.
He's good.
His ability, so like our coach's ability to take the same sort of concept of what you're saying about with Scooble and actually understand it, the physics behind it, the seam orientation. Because then when you go to throw that pitch and you try his same grip, and it's just not coming out of your hand with the same seam orientation, we've got to be able to know what grip adjustments you need to make based off of the way your hand works, based off of the way, holy cow, we've gotten all the way into like individual finger strength.
I believe that.
Think about if my hand was coming through and this one was way stronger,
And you're going to come off that finger more.
Yeah, and then when you throw it, this one's way stronger, and it comes off that one more. So now how do we take and adjust the way that you're holding seams? Because I'll tell you,
or do you use that to move it the way you want?
Well, it depends. It depends on what pitch. It depends on what your goal is.
Right,
yes and no. But you always work back from the plate. So, and what reigns supreme in pitch design is essentially just seam orientation or tilt. That seam shifted wake is a big concept of how the ball flies through the air. It actually, you try to cut it, and the ball catches the wind, the seam orientation better, and the interaction there actually sends it this way. But I've felt it and done it where it actually feels like I'm trying to cut it, but you get the seams to fly right and it goes this way. Now, to get that, to produce that, because of the way your hands, finger, strength, tendons, ligaments, is totally different. But at the end of the day, just take it super basic for a second. 4-seam, straight up carry. Okay. And your arm slot's like over here and your hand's like right here. And mine's like up here and like this.
Right.
If we're still both trying to get the 12 o'clock on the clock, you've got to hold the ball different than I do, because your hand's coming out here and I'm going to go like this.
And that's going to be very difficult at that arm angle.
Correct. Now, this is super hypothetical. Don't go try this at home. I'm just kidding. Do try it and see if it works for you. But if you took that ball,
professional.
Think about the seams, how they go right here. If we took that ball and we just shifted it this way and then it came off my hands like that, wouldn't it just fly more towards 12 o'clock?
That's possible.
But if you took my 4-seam grip of how I throw my real good 4-seam right there, and you tried to throw it from right there, it wouldn't work for you.
Right.
And yeah,
Makes
I mean,
sense.
that concept we've done and had success with players is just manipulating the grip of the ball in the player's hands to get the seam orientation the way we want it to be, to get the ball flight the way that we want it to be.
And I think everybody's done this. I do it just in playing catch. I used to, you move the ball around in your hand and try and flip and move and do and fart around, see where it goes, see how it does. And I think that's how you've kind of get the feel of something.
Yep.
And to me, when we're talking about these things and you're looking at this and you're talking about the greatest strength of an instructor is to be able to translate information into language. And that doesn't mean a dialect. If you're speaking Japanese, you do the same thing. Mm-hmm. But transferring language into an edible concept for the student.
Yep.
You have to, consumer, exactly, because you have to, if the person on the other end cannot consume the knowledge or the information in the proper context, it's not going to be of value to them.
Yep. And I think, so I don't want to diminish the value of the players understanding what they're doing. And I'll say this with a caveat that I don't really know this for sure, because I don't know Tariq Skubal, but I would bet you Tariq Skubal knows at least what it feels like. He knows what the ball is doing. Yes. He doesn't really understand the physics probably behind why the ball
I think
does
that's
what it
he's
does
getting at.
once it leaves his hand, but he knows exactly what his hand and the feeling of repeating that pitch looks like or feels like. That's all the player.
Talking about the science part.
Yeah, that's all the player needs to know. The coaches being better equipped for that is to help either troubleshoot in the moment, get the player back on track, help teach other players how to throw, things like that. Because at some point, Tariq Skubal came in and couldn't throw that.
Right.
And they had to understand, his archetype. They had to understand his repertoire. They had to understand how he was hardwired and all those things to help him get to a point where he picked a pitch, he found success with it, he confirmed it with data, and he repeated it thousands of times over again until that feel was just natural, normal, and a habit. That way he can go out there and execute it, in the 7th inning of a 2-2 game with a guy on second base, And that's the process. That's the
Absolutely.
process. And the coach being able to know those things, and how they all fit and intertwine together, is your ability to repeat it from player to player. Because you'll also see probably a lot of coaches, kind of on coattails of guys who figured it out for themselves. Not that the coach didn't help them, but that you kind of can get lucky with some guys that the way, think about if it's on a spectrum, then what you're coaching, if you coach a drop and drive guy, and I'm going to throw in super old school basic terms for a second that we don't use terms like this, but a drop and drive guy versus a tall and fall guy. Have you heard both of those terms?
Sure have.
Then if 50%, this is way too simplified, but you're going to get where I'm going with it. If 50% of the people are drop and drive guys and 50% of the people are tall and fall guys, then you coach 30 players over the offseason, and and this is usually how it happens. You specifically had way more success. You were a drop and drive guy, so you believe in your heart. That's success for you, so you're going to teach those guys those mechanics. Well, 50% of those players are going to get better from it, and the other 50% aren't.
Agreed.
Your job as a coach is not to be 50-50. That's a terrible percentage as a coach, but we allow that to happen, I think, a lot in our industry and in our game, that, you got to be equipped to handle and coach all of those players based off the players, based off their brains, based off of their bodies and all those things. And that's what makes a really good, successful coach is your ability to meet the players where they're at and be
Their
equipped enough.
abilities.
Yeah, right. Like I didn't throw changeups, but my ability to talk to people who can throw changeups and about how they need to, that's extremely important.
Absolutely.
Because I'm gonna run across the guy who's left-handed. I was right-handed. Left-handed who doesn't pitch with high velocity, that throws a bunch of changeups. I've got to be able to help that guy, because if I just pull on my own experiences, well, buddy, I was right-handed, threw harder, and didn't throw changeups. So if I don't do the work to study how to do that, I can't help you as a coach. I can give you some basic things and I can act like I know, but is that really going to produce success for you? At that point, you're flipping a coin and you don't know. So that's why, like, these strategies, this data, you can't just totally pull on experiences, because what about that circumstance or scenario? So all right, well, that's all we got time for today. Really appreciate you guys. Thanks for checking this out. Appreciate the input and the feedback. If you've got comments, suggestions, conversation about any of these topics we talked about today, drop them down in the comments. Give us a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel.
Please.
Subscribe to the channel, please, Brian says.
Yes.
We appreciate you guys. Thanks for checking it out. Hopefully these Torpedo Bats,
it'd be fun to watch.
Don't make the league average go up by like 40 points, So, all right, guys, we'll see you next time.